Hello, and welcome. The day is done, and it is time for the world to grow quiet. Find a place where you can be comfortable, where you can feel at ease. It is a world of cloche hats and gramophones, of gentle rain on tweed, and of quiet country lanes. It is the world of the undisputed queen of the whodunit, the architect of puzzles, and the master of the locked room mystery, Agatha Christie. To understand the mystery of those 11 days, we must first understand the woman at its heart. Let us go back to the days and months leading up to that cold December night, when the line between the storyteller and the story became irrevocably blurred. Allow the gentle sound of my voice to be your guide as we leave the present behind and journey into the past. Agatha fell into a deep and sorrowful state, finding it difficult to write, to socialize, or even to manage the simple rhythms of her daily life. Her husband of 12 years, Colonel Archibald Archie Christie, a handsome former pilot from the Great War, confessed to her that he was in love with another woman. For a woman already burdened by grief, this betrayal was the final breaking straw. That evening, Archie left their home to spend the weekend in the country with his mistress and their friends, leaving Agatha alone with her thoughts and her heartbreak. The home she had built, the life she had known, was collapsing around her. Her name was Nancy Neal, a young woman in their social circle. The stage was set, the central character was missing, and a perplexing question now hung in the cold night air. Where had Agatha Christie gone? On a quiet country road in Surrey, a local man discovered an abandoned motorcar. It was a Morris Cowley, parked haphazardly, its front wheels perched precariously over the edge of an embankment leading down to a chalk quarry. The spot was known as Newland's Corner, and nearby was a deep, still body of water with a famously eerie name, the Silent Pool. The car belonged to Agatha Christie. Archie told Agatha that their marriage was over, and that he wanted a divorce so he could marry her. So Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, famously took one of Mrs. Christie's gloves to a spiritualist medium in the hopes of gleaning some psychic clue. In the absence of a body, suspicion began to coalesce around the one person who had a clear motive to wish his wife gone. Her husband, Colonel Archibald Christie. Dorothy L.A. Sayers, another celebrated crime writer and a contemporary of Christie's, visited the scene herself, using her novelist's mind to analyze the clues and offer theories to the police. The story of his affair with Nancy Neal was now public knowledge, splashed across the tabloids. He was living out a plot that could have been written by Agatha herself, cast in the uncomfortable role of the villain. The pressure on him was immense. The nation watched his every move, and still, the search for the world's most famous mystery writer had turned up nothing but silence. His reserved upper-class demeanor, his stiff upper lip, was widely interpreted by the public as the cold and callous indifference of a guilty man. The police questioned him relentlessly. He had an alibi for the weekend he had spent with his mistress, but the theory began to form that he had perhaps hired someone to do his dirty work. The line between fiction and reality had become wonderfully and tragically blurred. The car's hood was up, and its headlamps were still on, their batteries having long since died. They feared they would find her body, that she had, in her despair, taken her own life. But the search of the cold, dark water yielded nothing. Inside the car, they found several of Mrs. Christie's personal belongings. The story became a national sensation, one of the first major missing person cases to be fueled by the modern mass media of the 1920s. Newspapers ran banner headlines. Photographs of Agatha Christie were printed on every front page. A reward was offered for any information. The public was captivated by the real-life mystery of the woman who wrote mysteries. A fur coat was draped over the seat, suggesting she had left it behind despite the cold December weather. A small suitcase containing a few items of women's clothing lay in the back. Her expired driving license was also in the car. But of Agatha Christie herself, there was no sign. She was a woman adrift in her own grief. She got into her beloved motorcar, a Morris Cowley, and drove away from her home, disappearing into the darkness of the quiet country lanes. Our story tonight takes us to the rolling hills of the English countryside in the heart of the 1920s. More than 1,000 police constables were assigned to the case. For the first time ever in such a search, airplanes were used, their pilots scanning the rolling hills and dense woods of Surrey from the sky. They were joined by thousands of civilian volunteers, local residents, fans of her books, all combing the countryside, calling her name, searching for any clue. For decades, she was the one who created the mysteries, who posed the questions, who controlled the narrative. But for 11 days in the winter of 1926, she became the mystery herself. In a chapter of her own life that could have been pulled from one of her novels, the world's greatest mystery writer vanished sometime in the late evening. Agatha went upstairs to her 7-year-old daughter Rosalind's room and kissed her goodnight. One was to her secretary, Charlotte Fisher, cancelling a planned weekend engagement. A third, it is believed, was for Archie himself. She then came downstairs and wrote 3 letters. Another was addressed to her brother-in-law. So take a slow, soft breath, sparking a nationwide manhunt and creating a quiet and deeply personal enigma that endures to this day. The year had dealt her 2 devastating blows, a 1-2 punch of grief and betrayal that had left her in a state of profound depression. This is not a story of thrilling chases, but of a quiet disappearance, a story of a brilliant mind in turmoil. In the year 1926, Agatha Christie was at the pinnacle of her career. The publication of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd had brought her international fame and critical acclaim. She was a literary sensation, a household name whose intricate plots and clever deceptions captivated millions. From the outside, her life was a portrait of success. She lived in a fashionable new home in Sunningdale, a wealthy suburb of Berkshire, which she and her husband had named Styles after her first novel. She had a beloved daughter, Rosalind, and the life of a celebrated author. But behind this facade of public success, her private world was quietly crumbling. The day began with a tense and emotional argument between Agatha and Archie. The first blow came with the death of her mother, Clara, to whom she had been exceptionally close. It was while she was in this fragile state that the second, and perhaps more shattering, blow fell. Imagine, if you will, the weight of those words. This brings us to Friday, the December 3rd, 1926. What happened next is a sequence of quiet, deliberate, and deeply puzzling actions. The police began to drag the silent pool, a deep, spring-fed lake with a reputation in local folklore. Then, she walked out into the cold December night, the world's greatest mystery writer. The woman who could untangle the most complex of fictional crimes had just vanished without a trace, leaving behind a real-life mystery of her own. The morning of Saturday, December 4th, 1926, dawned cold and grey. When the Surrey police arrived, they found a scene that was deeply puzzling. The immediate assumption was a grim one. He was hounded by the press. The news of the famous novelist's disappearance and the discovery of her abandoned car spread like wildfire. The search that followed was one of the largest in English history. The story took on an almost surreal quality as members of the literary world became involved. But as the days passed with no sign of Agatha, living or dead, the focus of both the police and the public began to shift. Archie found himself in an impossible position. And so, the master of the whodunit-esque husband was now the prime suspect in his own wife's disappearance. For 11 days, the search for Agatha Christie captivated and frustrated England. The police had exhausted every lead. The search of the countryside had yielded nothing. Her husband, Archie, remained under a dark cloud of public suspicion. The nation held its breath, fearing the worst. And then the turning point came, not from the dark woods of Surrey, but from hundreds of miles to the north, in the genteel and fashionable spa town of Harrogate. Imagine Harrogate in the 1920s. It was a place of healing and leisure, where the wealthy and the weary came to take the waters, to convalesce in elegant hotels, and to enjoy the slow, refined pace of life. Agatha Christie, it was said, was suffering from a profound case of amnesia. She could not recall the argument with her husband, abandoning her car, or how she had travelled the long distance from Surrey to Harrogate. But for those who had followed the case, the mystery, far from being solved, had simply transformed. The question was no longer the simple, physical one of where is Agatha Christie. It was now a much deeper, more complex, and perhaps unknowable psychological question. Who, for those 11 days, was Mrs. Theresa Neal? This theory suggests that the world's greatest mystery writer, faced with the ultimate betrayal, decided to deploy her unique genius not on the page, but in her own life. There is the almost novelistic perfection of the clues, the abandoned car at a place called the Silent Pool, the letters left behind, and most pointedly, her choice of an alias Theresa Neal, the very name of her rival. For the world's most famous plotter of mysteries to create such a perfect real-life mystery seemed, to many, too much to be a coincidence. We can examine the clues, we can debate the theories of amnesia or intent, but we can never truly know what transpired in the heart and mind of another person during a moment of profound crisis. You can let the competing theories dissolve into a gentle haze. You can allow the mystery to remain, a quiet and distant thought. The only thing required of you now is to let go of the story, to let go of the day, and to find your own quiet peace in the stillness of this moment. Her silence ensures that she remains, in some small way, the only one who knows the solution. They saw not a woman who had lost her mind, but a brilliant woman who had used it to lay a trap for the man who had broken her heart. Some questions are destined to hang forever in the quiet air of the past. Could she have staged the entire disappearance? Was it a calculated act of revenge, designed to humiliate her husband and cast him in the public eye as the prime suspect in her murder? The manhunt had ended, but the debate over what truly happened had just begun. The name she had used to register at the hotel, Teresa Neal, was the name of her husband's mistress. But we will never know for certain, because of one crucial fact. Agatha Christie herself maintained a complete and total silence on the subject for the rest of her life. In her extensive autobiography, she makes no mention of those 11 days. The period is simply skipped over, a blank chapter in an otherwise detailed life. She never confirmed, never denied, never explained. She locked the door on her own mystery and left the world to wonder. The nationwide search was over, but a nationwide debate had just begun. It reveals a woman far more complex than her public persona suggested. Was she the fragile victim of trauma, or the calculating architect of a revenge plot? The answer remains elusive. At its heart, regardless of the explanation, is a human story of profound grief, of heartbreak, and of a woman's desperate and mysterious response to it. She left behind a puzzle that, unlike her novels, had no final chapter revealing all the answers. The public, which had been so sympathetic to the plight of the missing novelist, was now divided. Or was it an elaborate hoax? A cruel trick played on the public. The press, which had painted her as a tragic victim, now began to ask skeptical questions. Was this a genuine case of memory loss? And the police, and most of all, on her unfaithful husband. The theory was that she had likely seen the name in a newspaper article about Archie, and in her confused and suggestible state, had simply adopted it as her own. The doctors who examined her claimed that the immense psychological strain of her mother's death, compounded by the shock of her husband's betrayal, had caused her mind to break from reality. She had entered a fugue state, a rare psychological condition where a person loses all sense of their own identity and past. In the days following Agatha's disappearance, a new guest had checked in. This theory holds that the combination of her profound grief over her mother's death and the acute emotional trauma of Archie's betrayal caused her mind to seek refuge in amnesia. It was a complete, albeit temporary, break from a reality that had become too painful to bear. In this view, she was not a manipulator, but a victim of her own fragile mental state. A woman who truly did not know who she was for those 11 last days. Mrs. Neal would read these articles with apparent interest, just like all the other guests, showing no outward sign of recognition or distress. A banjo player in the hotel's orchestra was reading his newspaper when he looked up at the quiet woman across the room. He looked down at the photograph of the missing novelist, then back at the guest known as Mrs. Neal. The resemblance was undeniable. He discreetly alerted the local Yorkshire police. She registered as Mrs. Teresa Neal, claiming to be from Cape Town, South Africa, and in mourning for the loss of a child. Archie travelled north to Harrogate immediately. The reunion, which the nation's press would have imagined as a scene of high drama, took place in the hotel's stately lounge. It was reportedly a quiet, almost awkward affair. Archie approached the woman he had not seen in 11 days. He called her Agatha. She looked up at him, and after a moment of what seemed like confusion, she responded. She was found, alive and physically, perfectly well. She was quiet, well-dressed, and settled easily into the hotel's routine. She read in the lounge, played bridge with other guests, and even danced in the evenings. It was a world of tea rooms, string quartets, and quiet relaxation, a world away from the frantic manhunt gripping the South. At the heart of this world was the Swan Hydropathic Hotel, a grand establishment known for its comfort and therapeutic baths. The newspapers in the hotel lounge were, of course, filled with headlines about the disappearance of the famous author, Agatha Christie. The discovery, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. The police arrived at the hotel, and after confirming the musician's suspicions, they contacted Archie Christie. The explanation that was immediately offered to the police and the press was a medical one. According to this narrative, she had no memory of the preceding 11 days. The nationwide search was over. The headlines could now proclaim that the missing writer had been found safe. Agatha Christie's reappearance did not so much end the mystery as begin a new and more enduring one. The official narrative, supported by her family and two doctors, was that of a genuine psychological fugue state. But there was another theory, one that whispered its way through the drawing rooms and tabloids of England, and it is a theory that has persisted ever since. The evidence for this view is circumstantial, but compelling. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between these two extremes. What we are left with is a story that has become as much a part of her legacy as Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple. The mystery of Agatha Christie's 11 Last Days is, in the end, a mystery of the human mind. It is a story that reminds us that some puzzles are not meant to be solved. But unlike the biographers and detectives of history, you are not asked to solve this puzzle tonight. Rest now. Good night.